The day after I gave him access to my guesthouse calendar, the lock code stopped working. I didn't know yet that he had changed it. I only knew that the keypad flashed red when I tried to enter, and that my cleaner texted to ask if the place had been taken off the market. I met him because of that house. I own a small coastal property in Northern California that I rent short-term. I don't use a management company. I handle it myself because I like knowing who comes and goes. That afternoon, he showed up while I was replacing a broken screen door between checkouts. He said he was the friend of the previous guest, had come to pick up a jacket that was left behind. He knew the guest's name. He knew the dates. He knew which room. I let him in. He didn't linger. He thanked me, apologized for the inconvenience, and before leaving, pointed out that my listing photos didn't reflect the new deck I'd added. He said it casually, like an observation, not advice. Then he left. Later that evening, I received a message through the platform. It was him. He said he worked remotely in marketing, had helped friends optimize listings, and if I ever wanted feedback, he'd be happy to look at mine. No pitch. No pressure. I didn't respond until the next day. We started talking after that. About occupancy rates. About how the algorithm favored certain phrasing. About seasonality in small coastal towns. He sent screenshots from other projects he'd helped with. He didn't suggest changes to my pricing. He suggested changes to my calendar gaps. It was specific. It was useful. A week later, he asked if he could stop by to show me something on his laptop because it was easier than explaining in messages. I agreed. We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't touch anything that wasn't his. When he left, the spreadsheet he'd built was still open on my screen. After that, he came by more often. Sometimes with coffee. Sometimes just to drop off printed notes. He never stayed long. He never asked for anything. When I mentioned that I was tired of answering guest questions late at night, he showed me how to automate responses without losing the personal tone. He did it on his own account first, then walked me through it on mine. It felt efficient. It felt calm. At some point, I realized I was no longer double-checking his suggestions. Not because I trusted him blindly, but because everything he touched worked better afterward. Bookings filled in. Messages slowed. My income stabilized without me thinking about it. We slept together for the first time after a dinner I cooked because he said he'd had a long week. He washed the dishes afterward. In the morning, he fixed the loose hinge on the bedroom door without mentioning it. When a guest accidentally locked themselves out during a storm, he drove over with a spare key I'd forgotten I'd given him weeks earlier, handled it, and texted me that it was taken care of. I didn't have to get out of bed. It seemed reasonable when he suggested syncing my calendar with his, just so he could flag potential issues before they became problems. He framed it as temporary, a trial, a way to reduce friction. I sent him the access link while we were sitting on the couch, my head on his shoulder, the TV on mute. The next morning, the lock code didn't work. I didn't panic when the code failed. I called him instead. He answered on the second ring, already aware of the issue. He said the platform had pushed an update overnight, and that sometimes the smart locks desynced. He told me not to worry and asked me to give him 10 minutes. I stood on the porch watching the fog move in while he handled it remotely. By the time I walked back inside, the code worked again. He stopped by later that day with pastries from a place I liked but rarely went to because parking was impossible. He didn't mention the lock unless I did. When I thanked him, he said it was easier for him to monitor things centrally, especially if guests arrived early or late. He framed it as protection. Fewer surprises. That week, he started catching things before I noticed them. A double booking that never materialized. A guest who asked for a refund before I even saw the message. He would tell me what had happened after it was already resolved. I didn't feel excluded. I felt relieved. He never took over my account. He worked alongside it. He asked before changing anything. When he suggested that I stop manually approving stays and switch to instant booking, he walked me through the risk profile, showed me how to restrict it, and waited until I said yes. When I hesitated, he dropped it completely and changed the subject. We didn't see each other every day, but he checked in daily. Short messages. Screenshots. Questions that showed he remembered small things like which guests made me nervous and which weeks I liked to keep light. When he stayed over, he left early in the morning and didn't wake me. I'd find the coffee machine cleaned and a note on the counter saying he'd already flagged a maintenance issue with the deck railing. It felt like having an extra set of hands that didn't need managing. At some point, he asked if I wanted him to be listed as a co-host on the platform. He said it would make it easier for him to communicate directly with guests if there was an issue while I was busy. He didn't push. He said it was optional. Reversible. I said no at first. He didn't argue. He continued doing exactly what he'd been doing. 2 weeks later, when I was on a work trip and a guest complained about the heater at midnight, he handled it through my login while I slept. In the morning, I thanked him and added him as a co-host without telling him first. He noticed. He kissed me longer that night. There were small moments that might have stood out if I'd been watching for them. He started referring to the place as ours when talking about future upgrades. He suggested a new cleaner he knew, said she was reliable and flexible. He offered to coordinate with her directly to save me time. When I forwarded him her contact, he took over scheduling without asking again. I didn't miss it. Things just got quieter. He stopped asking me to review messages before he sent them. He summarized instead. He said guests responded better to consistency. I agreed. When I logged in, I saw less to do. That felt like progress. We planned a short trip together, just a few days inland. While we were away, he sent me updates without me requesting them. Occupancy steady. No issues. One guest extended their stay because they felt taken care of. He told me that, not as praise but as information. On the drive back, he asked if I'd ever thought about scaling. Maybe adding another property. He said I was already doing the work. I just didn't see it that way yet. I laughed and told him I wasn't looking for more responsibility. He said that was exactly why it would work. The idea came back a few days later, not as a plan but as a question. He asked if I would be open to letting him handle guest communications entirely for a month, just as a test. He said I could step back in any time. He framed it as data collection. He wanted to see how much time it actually saved me. I said yes because nothing about it felt like giving something up. Felt like letting something run. He set up a shared dashboard so I could see activity without needing to intervene. Messages flowed through him. Issues were tagged and resolved. He sent me summaries once a day. Short. Clean. I stopped opening the platform altogether. Around the same time, he started spending more nights at my place. Not officially. He kept some clothes there, but not many. He didn't ask for space. He used what was there. He folded things when he left. He never rearranged. One evening, he brought over a folder. Not thick. Just a few printed pages. He said he'd been thinking about what scaling could look like without stress. Not buying something new. Leveraging what I already had. Inside was a projection. Conservative numbers. A scenario where my property could support a short-term lease on a second place for peak season only. He had already spoken to a landlord he knew who was flexible. No commitment. Just an option. I told him I didn't want to deal with another owner. He said I wouldn't have to. He'd be the point of contact. He'd handle coordination. I just approved the structure. He didn't ask me to decide. He left the folder on the table and went to make dinner. I didn't look at it until the next morning. The numbers made sense. The risk was capped. The lease was temporary. The income covered itself. The only thing that changed was complexity, and he had already absorbed that. When I asked what he got out of it, he said experience. A case study. Something he could point to later. It didn't feel like a trade. It felt like alignment. We talked about it again a week later, after he'd already fielded questions from the landlord and clarified terms. He didn't bring anything to me that wasn't clean. When I hesitated, he reminded me that nothing would be signed in my name directly. He suggested using an LLC I already had but rarely used. He said it would keep things tidy. He had already pulled the documents for me to review. I signed because it felt like finishing something that was already underway. Because he was sitting next to me, not watching. Because I trusted the way he waited. After that, the rhythm changed. Not abruptly. Just enough. He stopped sending daily summaries. He said there was less to report. When I asked about a booking that should have come through, he said it had been rerouted to avoid overlap. He said it casually, like a technical adjustment. I noticed that when guests reached out to thank me, they used his name. We were still sleeping together. still cooking, still planning small things. But there were pockets of time where he was busy and unreachable, and I didn't know with what. He didn't hide it. He just didn't narrate it anymore. The midpoint came on a Tuesday afternoon. He asked me to sign one more authorization. Temporary. It allowed him to approve refunds and modifications without looping me in, just for the peak window. He said it would expire automatically. He showed me where. I signed because the cleaner was waiting in the other room and dinner was in the oven, and I trusted the way he had handled everything so far. That night, he fell asleep before me. The next morning, the platform showed him as the primary host. I noticed the change because the interface looked different. Not wrong, just rearranged. My name was still there, but smaller. His sat at the top. When I clicked into the settings, most of the permissions were grayed out. Not removed, just inactive. I texted him a screenshot. He replied 10 minutes later, said the platform sometimes reordered hosts during peak windows. He told me it didn't affect ownership, just workflow. He said he'd look into it. He didn't. Instead, he got busier. He stopped coming by during the day. When he stayed over, he worked from his laptop in the other room, door half closed. If I asked what he was doing, he said guest flow, or pricing adjustments, or nothing I needed to worry about. He still cooked, still kissed me goodbye. The tone didn't change. The availability did. Messages from guests no longer reached me at all. When I searched my inbox, it was empty except for automated receipts. I asked him about it. He said it was intentional. He was A/B testing response strategies and didn't want overlap to skew the data. I let it go. The cleaner started texting me less. When she did, it was to ask questions she used to know the answer to. She said he'd given her a new schedule and asked her to clear changes with him directly. I told her that was fine. It made sense. He was coordinating. One afternoon, I tried to block off a week for myself. The calendar wouldn't let me. A message popped up saying the dates were locked due to an active booking. I checked with him. He said it was a long-term guest he'd approved at a discounted rate to stabilize occupancy. He said it was temporary. I didn't remember agreeing to that. When I asked to see the booking details, he said he'd send them later. He didn't. That night he was tired. He said the season was heavier than expected. He asked if I could be patient for a few more weeks until things leveled out. It didn't feel like a request. It felt like information. I started checking the bank deposits. The amounts were smaller. More frequent, but smaller. When I asked, he said it was cash flow smoothing. He said gross would look better at the end of the month. He reminded me that we discussed optimization over spikes. We hadn't discussed that. He stopped staying over altogether. Not abruptly, just gradually. One night became 2, then a week. When I asked if everything was okay, he said yes. He said he was staying closer to the second place to manage turnover. I realized I didn't have the address. I tried to log into the platform from a different browser. It asked me to request access from the primary host. There was a button. I didn't click it. Instead, I drove to the guest house. The keypad worked. The house was occupied. I hadn't known. Inside, a couple sat at the table with laptops. They looked up confused. They said they'd been told the owner wouldn't be stopping by, and that all communication should go through him. They said his name easily, like it belonged there. When I called him from the driveway, it went to voicemail. His message said he was unavailable and would return calls within 48 hours. I stood there longer than I needed to, holding my phone, watching the lights inside my house stay on. I waited the 48 hours because the voicemail told me to. I didn't call again. I didn't text. I checked the platform twice a day and watched nothing change. His name stayed at the top. New bookings appeared and disappeared without passing through me. The calendar filled into weeks I used to keep empty. On the third day, I received an automated email thanking me for approving a refund I hadn't seen. It was signed with my name. I drove to the second place the next morning using the address from the lease copy I still had. The door was open. Inside, someone I didn't know was replacing linens. She asked if I was there for an inspection. She said he'd told her the owner might stop by, but that everything went through him. She called him while I stood there. He didn't answer. I left without saying who I was. That afternoon, my bank flagged an irregular transfer. Not missing money. Redirected money. The deposits were still coming in, but a portion was being routed through a different account before landing where it always had. The explanation line read, "Management allocation." I called the platform support line. I was placed on hold. When someone finally answered, they asked me to verify my identity. They said only the primary host could make changes to host hierarchy. They said I'd agreed to that in the authorization. I asked when. They gave me a date and a time. A Tuesday afternoon. Peak window. They emailed me a copy of what I'd signed. It was my signature. It was real. It did exactly what he'd said it did, and more. It didn't expire automatically. It required the primary host to remove it. I didn't cry. I sat at my desk and read it again. I sent him one message. Just one. I asked him to call me. He responded hours later. Not with a call. With a sentence. He said he was in meetings all day and would reach out soon. He thanked me for my patience. That night, I slept alone for the first time in weeks without expecting him to come in late. In the morning, the platform showed 3 new 5-star reviews praising the management and naming him specifically. The cleaner texted to ask if she should invoice him directly now. I told her yes. I stopped trying to access the account. I stopped driving by the house. I watched the deposits continue, thinner each time, regular enough to look intentional. When I asked the bank if anything was technically wrong, they said no. A week later, I received a notice that the second lease had been extended. It listed him as the operating contact. It listed me as a silent party. I forwarded it to him. He replied that this was good news. He said it meant stability. That was the last message he sent me. After that, there was nothing. No fight. No explanation. No scene. Just silence that had already been arranged. I walked into my guest house one last time using the code that still worked. The couple had checked out. The place was clean. Neutral. Reset. On the table was a printed welcome sheet with his name at the top and a line that said, "For all needs, contact." My name wasn't on it. The first thing that stopped working was the lock. Not because he changed the code again. Because the keypad itself was offline. When I called the service number on the back, they told me the device was no longer registered under my account. They gave me a reference number and said the registered user would have to contact them. The registered user was him. I stood on the porch and didn't try to force anything. I knew better by then. I left and sat in my car until the cleaner arrived. She unlocked the door with the code she said he'd sent her that morning. Inside, the house looked the same. Neutral. Prepared for someone else. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't announce myself. I walked through the room slowly and noticed what was gone. Not valuables. Small things. The folder where I kept printed reservations. The binder with appliance warranties. The spare keys. Even the welcome basket I used to restock myself had been replaced with a different version. Same concept. Different hand. On the fridge was a laminated card with Wi-Fi details and emergency contacts. His email. His number. I took the card down and put it in my bag. That was the only thing I removed. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer. I brought everything. The lease. The authorization. The emails. She read quietly and asked me a few questions. Then she told me what could be challenged and what could not. She didn't use dramatic language. She said the word exposure more than once. She said it would take time. She said control was a separate issue from ownership. She said the income stream might continue but differently. When I asked about getting my account back, she said that would depend on his cooperation or a court order. When I asked how likely that was, she didn't answer directly. She asked how long I'd known him. I left without scheduling a follow-up. A week later, the deposits changed again. Smaller. Less frequent. Still steady. Still legal. Still enough to make stopping them seem irrational. I received a system notification informing me that the primary host had updated branding assets. The logo on the listing changed. Subtle. Clean. Professional. It looked better than what I'd had. There was no message attached. I stopped checking daily after that. Not because it hurt, but because nothing moved. The silence wasn't empty. It was maintained. One morning, I opened my mailbox and found a forwarded piece of mail. A guest had written a thank you note by hand and addressed it to him at my address. Inside was a gift card to a restaurant I'd never been to. I threw it away without opening the envelope further. The last confirmation came quietly. I tried to book a single night at my own property under a different name. The system declined. Not available. Long-term guest. I closed the laptop. That night, I slept without setting an alarm. In the morning, there were no messages to catch up on. No summaries. No dashboards. Just a space where my involvement used to be. The house still existed. The income still arrived. My name was still on paper. But access was gone. And nothing needed to happen next for that to be permanent.